bigger issues or maybe wider spread issues about our government and our fragmentation. But not before. I'll ask you about that on the other side of a recap of this week's social media conversation that will inform the rest of the show. This week, the Stay Tuned Twitter chat participants weighed in on regionalism and our 92 municipalities and helped frame tonight's show. Court Hinton feels regionalism is a negative. He said it's hurt the STO region, making it so fragmented, city versus county, metro area versus STL county. One of our featured contributors for the chat, St. Louis Strong, said some say it creates better access, but the smallest munis have been rife with corruption. Casey Hinton countered, stating corruption knows no size, happens in bigger or smaller munis. Aaron B. thinks having so many palms to grease makes implementation of any plan more expensive and difficult. Better Together says it's not just inefficient, but unfair when municipalities are dependent on their courts, adding, when you have a town that takes over 40% of its revenue, some at 60% from court fines and fees, that's a problem. Many of the chat's participants are concerned that this many munis means too many cooks in the kitchen. Some believe that all these municipalities came about from decades of so-called white flight. Want to be a part of our next chat? Follow us on Twitter at StayTunedSTL and join the conversation on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. with the hashtag StayTunedSTL. Okay, Alvin is still with us from STLmag.com. Also with us, Tony Messenger. Welcome back, the Metro columnist for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And Jim Brasfield, Vice President of City Strong, which developed as kind of a reaction to Dave Leipholtz's organization. He's the Director of Community-Based Studies for Better Together. And in the interest of a tidy segue, maybe I'll start with you, Tony, because last week on the show, you mentioned that this idea of what we're talking about now, the fragmentation of our region, some would say it serves people better, others would disagree. You said there was a connection, perhaps. Do you see a connection between this conversation and the one Alvin and I were just having with the Rams?
I see a connection between the conversation about fragmentation in St. Louis and almost everything that's going on in our region. So last week we were talking about the flooding and how difficult it is to plan when there's 90 municipalities doing their own thing. The stadium. One of the problems with the stadium plan that made it so weak, that made it easier for the NFL to turn it down, is that when the county executive said, we want to go to a public vote, and the mayor and the governor said, well, we don't need to do that, they just dropped the county out of it. So forget all that tax money, forget all the people in those municipalities. It's emblematic of what happens in our community on a variety of issues, but particularly big issues related to economic development. We are so fragmented by school district, by police department, by municipal courts, what we saw in Ferguson and what we're seeing in the legislature and in the Supreme Court, and trying to respond to that in terms of the problems in the municipal courts. That fragmentation is causing a lot of the problems that we have as a community.
Dave, let's try to quantify some of this fragmentation, because I know you guys have done some studies before we kind of dive in on the pros and cons. Is there a measurable way to back up the idea that we are fragmented?
Sure. I mean, I think when you look at the mere numbers, 81 courts, 58 police departments, 43 fire departments. We have 684 elected officials, municipal officials, 571 aldermen. If you look at that from the inside, it's difficult to fathom. If you're somebody coming in trying to look at it for business expansion to relocate, you don't even know where to start. In the fallout from Ferguson, we had CBS News, the Department of Justice, reaching out to just try and figure out how the region functions. The city's a county, the St. Louis counties doesn't have anything to do with the city, those sorts of things.
So this is different than other regions?
Absolutely.
And is that quantifiable in terms of how we compare to other regions?
Sure, we found that it's costly. You know, one of the arguments is that local governments it's closer to the people, and that's true, but it also comes at a price. You're operating 90 city halls, you're operating all those different police departments. every city has a city manager. I think that there's 25 that make six-figure salaries. That's very different. So if people want that, that's fine, but those are facts that you're going to have to pay for. There's no way to streamline 90 city halls.
Jim, tell me how you came to this conversation, and I gather that you have a very different perspective.
A somewhat different perspective. I think we can probably blame it all on James Madison, because
I thought we were blaming everything on Stan Kroenke.
Well, because American government at all levels, tends to be fragmented. We have 50 states. We have small states like Wyoming and Delaware, large states like California. And would the country function more efficiently if we had no states, just one big country? Well, maybe some people would think that, but I think the same thing you come down to urban areas, and in all urban areas you have a variety of different kinds of governmental structures. I mean, I've lived in Cleveland, and I thought Cleveland was a lot like St. Louis. Not quite as many municipalities, but lots of municipalities in the area, multiple counties in an urban area. So I don't think what makes our St. Louis County a little different is that we have the 90 municipalities in the county, and some of them are very small. But take that away, and I don't find St. Louis being that much different than most other urban areas. And in fact, an old friend of mine, an eminent political scientist, wrote a classic piece a number of years ago talking about governance in urban areas, and he was talking about Cleveland, not St. Louis, as being an exercise in diplomacy. That if you want to, look at it like you would look at trying to do diplomacy with a number of nations, and if you want to be successful in pulling people together, you have to exercise the skills of negotiation and diplomacy rather than a kind of a single executive issuing orders.
Let me show another Twitter poll we did, and while this isn't scientific, it may bring up an interesting perspective, and that is we asked the Twitter audience if St. Louis has too many municipalities. 92% said yes, we do. So whether or not functionally or the different philosophies of government, is there a mentality or a mindset that that goes back to what you're talking about, that we don't come together and solve things in a singular way or in a unified way?
Well, I think our definition of municipality is different in St. Louis too. Municipality in some places like Louisville, for example, means that you have a metro government, but then you can levy a property tax to have extra levels of service. In St. Louis, it means you have your own courtroom, it means you have your own police department, fire service. And also within a region of 1.3 million people, when you have 90 governments, there's a hyper-localized version of what success is. So I'll offer an economic development incentive to a business just to move a mile down the road because my citizens get that revenue then. And it's very divided, and there's internal competition instead of external.
Or even larger than on the small, Centene wanting to build a tower in Ballpark Village, and then now we'll stay in Clayton instead.
I answered the poll, and I'm part of that 92%. And I think that while it's not a scientific poll, I think you'd actually find many members of Jim's organization that would agree that there are too many municipalities in St. Louis County. There tends to be this acceptance that, well, there's a few bad apples, there's some that are too small that don't have the revenue. Maybe we should get rid of those, but let's not throw the whole thing out. I go back to the study that the Police Executive Research Forum did when they were looking at our providing how we provide police service in this region, and they're a really well-respected national organization of law enforcement folks, and they said they haven't seen fragmentation like this, specifically in police departments, anywhere else in the country, and it's negatively affecting our ability to provide public safety to our community. That, to me, is a rallying cry for, yeah, we've done this for a long time, but it's time to do something different.
What's at stake? I mean, more than just football. Who stands to benefit or suffer?
Well, you would have the elimination, quite frankly, at first, of North County municipalities. And it would dilute some of the African-American representation that you have in St. Louis County. That'd be the first to go. Now, two, you may have had 92% people say, like, yeah, there are too many municipalities, okay? I guarantee you, and I live in Kirkwood, and I give all the standard answers. I like having my own police department. I like having my own fire department. When a tree limb falls, and this actually happened, and takes out a power line during an ice storm, I'm not waiting 2 days. I'm probably waiting 2 hours because we call up our power from Ameren. We have our own electric department in Kirkwood. I like that. That's what I pay my taxes for, and I have no problem with that. And so I cannot see, I don't want to be part of a borough. I don't want to be part of this major conglomeration of things because I like what I have. Now, you could call me selfish, and that's fine.
Is that easier to say when you live in Kirkwood than it is unincorporated North St. Louis
I
County?
can't speak for unincorporated North St. Louis. That's what I'm saying is that, but I can speak for where I live. And I think that there's a broad brush that says that you're either selfish or you're racist or you don't care about the rest of the region if you want to go separate from this, conglomeration of things. And I disagree with that. I just totally disagree with that. And I don't think it's fair to kind of say that you are what's standing in the way of what could be, work in St. Louis and St. Louis County. St. Louis and St. Louis County is not where we have too many municipalities, maybe true, maybe not. But what we lack is leadership. What we lack is somebody who can get the job done. And we keep electing people and doing things that are more interested in themselves than they are in this region, and that's what our problem is.
But whomever you elect to what office would you like to see provide that leadership in this particular system that we have?
Well, we have a mayor and we have a county executive, and the Board of Aldermen is coming down in its number in a number of years here. That's already been voted on. You've got the county, more than 1 million people, and what, 6 people are on the council?
Can one elected office rally their entire region in the way it's set up now?
No. But I also think that there is a mentality in St. Louis that for Veneta Terrace to have better services, to have a baseline of services that we say you're going to have no matter what because you're a citizen of this region, that a Kirkwood or a Webster has to decline. What we need to find is how to raise up those other aspects of our region and realize that as a part of a community we can't approach this as a zero-sum game. And it goes back to the internal competition within St. Louis. There's a mentality that permeates, I think, our region as a whole that, there's going to be winners and losers because that's how the structure's been set up for so long, and it's played out that way. So if you fix that structure, I think that can change as well.
Do you buy that?
No, not completely. And in part, we've talked about region, 1.3 million people. That neglects the 350,000 people who live in St. Charles County. Sure. There are more people that live in St. Charles County than live in the city of St. Louis. And it doesn't count the quarter of the almost 3 million people that live in the metropolitan area on the Illinois side of the river. They get. So if you're really talking about the region as a whole, then we ought to be talking about St. Charles County and Franklin County and St. Clair County and those places, because that's what the region is. That's what the Census Bureau defines as a region, and that's what the region is.
Jim, I agree with that, and I think that the way to get to that regionalism is to strengthen what we have in St. Louis first. If St. Louis City and St. Louis County, rather than fighting amongst ourselves, and all of those municipalities, rather than fragmenting ourselves, were the big, strong city that it could be, that helps bring the other regional counties into the fold so that there's a greater political cohesion. Alvin, you were talking about the lack of leadership, and I agree with you, but I think our fragmentation leads to that lack of leadership. We were talking off air while you and Casey were talking earlier, and we were talking about some of the local municipalities that are having infighting right now, what went on in Ellisville, what's going on in University City and Wentzville and Chesterfield and some other places. I think that little tiny municipal infighting is related to our fragmentation, because we divide our spoils and give people little tiny fiefdoms and say, go fight amongst yourselves there, rather than combining our strength as a region and encouraging strong leaders to come up and say, how are we going to lead our region forward, rather than just fight over Peter taking from Paul.
So you were suggesting there for a second, it sounded like the issue of the city and the county and kind of repairing that relationship there.
Oh, absolutely. I'm a fan of what some people call the nuclear option. Gene and Cole McNary wrote an op-ed in the Post-Dispatch this week that called for a borough system, but key to that is the city and the county become one, the municipalities go away, and then we divide into 9 different municipalities, boroughs, wards, whatever you call them, we still have some local control, but we unite, and how we divide that area could actually increase African American participation in the political system. While we would lose numbers of officials, we may actually increase strength and encourage stronger black leaders to come up through the system as well.
And so that borough plan said that where do you split the city? Well, at 44 South. So rather than put north and south together, what I would call zebra stripes, we got a line right down to the middle.
Right, and
once
maybe
it's separating,
right.
it's separating
But those
black
are,
from white. Like
but those are the details that come at some point after you decide what your structure is, and those are important details, obviously, that have to be discussed. But that's what makes this discussion so difficult. Is we're talking about a general idea that says what we have now isn't working. And we're talking about probably 500 different options of what we might ultimately get to in terms of a unified unigov or regionalized government or something better than what we have now.
We're down to about a minute left.
Okay, for 100 years in this community, about every 20 years, we've gone through this discussion. Back in the 1920s, in the late 50s, early 60s, in the late 1980s, and now, and each time the discussion of trying to make a radical, huge change has distracted us from zeroing in on core issues. And I think if we want to look at core issues, we need to look at things like education and jobs and so on, rather than the structure of government. Changing the structure of government isn't going to change that.
And mass transit.
I'll give you the last word. We got 15 seconds.
Well, I would just say local control is great if you have the resources to actually provide the services. We have a lot of communities that don't, and that's part of the fragmentation issue as well.
Someone may have to go first to volunteer to relinquish a little power. Thank you all for your time. Alvin, Tony, Jim, and Dave, I appreciate you all being here. Until next time, stay tuned.